This is great. You're quiet like my students, even better. Ladies and gentlemen, most welcome. I should say also welcome to those who follow this event online, wherever you are. We are currently in the auditorium of the Stockholm School of Economics. This is, as you can see, it hosts 300 seats, and that's because all classes at Stockholm School of Economics has 300 students. And if we look at the title, Celebrating Football for All, when I looked through the registration, all the type of stakeholders that we were envisioning for this event is here today. Obviously, we have football lovers, we have policymakers, we have journalists, we have supporters, we have partners, we have students, we have faculty. Fantastic. My name is Martin Karlsson-Wall, and I am the director for the Center for Sports and Business. I will be the moderator tonight, and it will be an honor. And I actually should say, I think I will also learn a lot, even though I've helped prepare the panels. For each of the panels, we will have roughly 20-25 minutes for the invited speakers, and then 5-10 minutes for questions from the audience, just so you understand the format. But before we go there, I want to start with this word, unfaithful. Because to me, this is really what football is all about. And it's because if someone says you're being unfaithful, it's about the worst thing you can ever be. I mean, this is a business school. In markets, we have transactional relationships. If I change from Netflix to HBO, no one will say, Martin, you're being unfaithful. But when my son is 11 years old, when he changed, I'm a big fan of IFK Norrköping, where I come from, my region. When he changed from IFK Norrköping to Djurgården, both myself and my father, his grandfather, felt, what is going on here? And I think this is one of the key things with football. We need to understand that this is not the normal market. Perhaps we shouldn't even use the word market. We should maybe call it a community, because I think that's what it's all about. And I think what is at stake here, you can see in this slide. Do we have sport as a product, or do we have sport as a religion, where we really can talk about faith, and you're being faithful, and you're being loyal, and the sport is really part of your identity? And if we look on the one side here, this is a visit that I was fortunate enough to have at Oakland Athletics. And for those of you lovers here that loves data analytics, you know what it's all about. That's the club of the Moneyball. And you can see up there, it's in the box of the CEO, Dave Cavell. So I should say it was a great experience. But on the other hand, we have what I think was even a better experience. And that was in the fall of 2021. When we broke the record here in Sweden in terms of women's football. And what I really particularly loved here was Hammarby against AIK, was the idea that the fans manifested this in a way that when you looked at the fans, you could not see, is this a women's game or a men's game? To me, that's the optimal complement in football. When the fans really say, you are part of our family and we should not treat you as a little bit of an extra product. And that's what it's all about. Let's see if it works. It works. Super good. So some words about our school and what the Center for Sports and Business actually does. I should say, when I started the Stockholm School of Economics, I'm a professor in accounting, which I call that's the head. Football has become the heart. And I think what we contribute with, and all academic research has contributed, is a little bit of the head to a world of the heart. And when we talk about future-proofing sports, it's really about saying the world of football has so many things, but I think academia can play a little bit of a role here. And here you see the Stockholm School of Economics. And for those of you maybe visiting online here, the Stockholm School of Economics has been around for a little bit over 100 years. We're a small school, but we've been fortunate enough to have, except for the city location, really, really good student and faculty. So for the past 20 years, we've been ranked as the #1 business school in the Nordic region by the Financial Times. And what I really feel is the next step for us is to go beyond the business sector and really unite the business sector in other parts such as sport, and that's what we're doing it. And the birdcage here, that's the new educational mission of the Stockholm School of Economics. Because what we want is, we want students who dare to fly out. We don't want students to just come here and learn the textbooks. We want students that constantly feel, what does it look like outside the birdcage? And I think in a sector as conservative, I should say, as football, the birdcage could potentially be quite interesting. How do we people inside of the sector, dare to fly out? And as I said to my students, we don't need to fly out and not come back. But once in a while, we need to fly out and see what's going on outside of the world of football. And the way we do this is to really gather researchers from all around the world at the Center for Sports and Business. And here you see some of the schools that our faculty comes from. In the West, it starts with Stanford, and furthest to the east, when for some it's actually the West, University of Sydney. And I think also, as you can see, we have members that are part of the Nobel Committee. It's really about combining academic rigor, the brain, with practical relevance, the heart. And we've been doing that since 2015. And as you all know, things takes a little bit of time to develop. But right now, I think with forums and conferences like this, we jointly can contribute a little bit. And one of the models that I teach our students and that we have developed, and I should say it's a little bit of a simplification, is about understanding global sports through 3 Ps. If we start in North America, as we could see, it's all about the profits. You talk about monetizing the fans, you talk about actually customer profitability analysis. That's the North American model. I should say North American professional sports model, because my favorite in North America is college sport, and there you have the passion. In Europe, it's really focusing on sport as a religion, where supporters are family members, where it actually means something to be unfaithful. It's not just when I switch from Netflix to HBO. And then we have in Asia, the importance of politics. And what we see now in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and China, where the sort of the state really builds the sport performance. And I think from an academic perspective, what's really interesting is a little bit to change the conversation from right or wrong, but rather look into the mix of these 3. So in the same thing as we talk about different playing systems, are you playing 4-4-2 or are you playing 3-5-2 or what are you playing? Ideally, our world, we will be discussing what type of sports system do you want and how do you combine profit, passion, and politics, and why is it so? Because from our perspective, where we are right now, it's a little bit of a blame game. And we feel that the next step is to create new models where dialogue can be fostered. And that's, I think, one of the key things with today, a starting point, as we said, preparing this. Because European football, as we will see, is a little bit of a crossroad. It's being threatened. And I think we will learn quite many things tonight. And before we start with the first panel, I just want to encourage you all to ask questions. So with that, let's open up for the first panel. Setting the scene here, is European football experiencing a crisis? And we purposely put it in question mark. So we'll see what our panelists say. So I welcome them up on stage. Please, give them a warm hand. Katarina in the middle. Christer. Lars-Christer, please.
Yeah.
So I will start.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Because since you are a fan of Norrköping,
Yes.
how come that you have a sky blue sweater?
And white also.
Yeah, okay.
But you know, there are other teams that has light blue also, as you know.
Yeah.
Let me see here. Click here. I will give each panelist just a minute to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Lars-Christer, please.
Yeah, my name is Lars-Christer Olsson. I have had several positions in national and international football. I've been the CEO of UEFA for a period. I've been the president of the European leagues and the president of the Swedish league and member of the ExCo in UEFA and Sweden, actually. Mm-hmm. That's it, more or less.
Thank you very much. We go to the next. Katarina, please.
Katarina Pietlovic, assistant professor in sports law and EU competition law from Católica University in Portugal. I'm also a general secretary of the Union of European Clubs in Football.
Last but not least, Kenneth, please.
Yeah, Kenneth Kortsen from University of Northern Denmark. I do research in commercialization of football, looking into business models, how technology and data influences football, and then I also have another leg on the sporting side. I've worked for the past 10 years for Aalborg BK. Those of you that are from Sweden will know we had Erik Hamrén as a head coach until the other day, and now Oskar Hiljemark. I've been coaching the men's reserve team and the women's team, and now I work with the chairman.
Thank you very much. For each of the panel, the format will be that based on the discussions we've had before, we will have a slide, so it's a little bit easier for you to follow here. And you can see the slide a little bit here. But I will ask you, Lars-Christer, if you summarize some of the trends that we've seen. I mean, you were actually part of the start of the Champions League, so you've been around quite a bit.
Yeah, I can see that on
exactly. The last 30 years, give us a little bit of insights.
Yeah, I think the two most important factors are actually the change of the European club competitions and the change of the English game, the start of the Premier League. The Premier League and the establishment of the UEFA Champions League. That was a huge change for the international competitions, where suddenly it was not only the cup winners or the champions of each of the countries participating. They organized the competition based on also commercial factors and commercial opportunities. And then I think I would say that the Premier League was probably the league which was turning to a world audience rather than a European or a domestic audience, and they broke a lot of boundaries there. So that was together with the fact that the privatization of the media market, or television market, I would say, because the new TV companies, they needed content. They wanted eyeballs to come to their products, and one of these vehicles were football, actually.
Thank you. Katarina, what would you say? Anything you would pick out that from academic law perspective you would want to highlight during the last 30 years here?
There's so much, but a few perhaps would be the creation of Champions League. In 1998 then, there was a proposal by Media Partners International to the group of biggest European clubs to break away and form the private breakaway league. And this was the first time that something so serious actually on that front was done, which is when UEFA reacted by expanding Champions League, giving more space for Big Five or the clubs from Big Five. And basically, that's when the clubs realized, oh, we can do this every time we want something. And the threat of breakaway leagues was used to twist the hand of UEFA to give them more money, or to create rules that give them more money to these big clubs, to create governance structures that are very favorable for elite clubs, which eventually also resulted in 2008 creation of ECA, European Club Association, which claims to represent European football clubs, but in fact it is still a G14, the group of, it's an economic interest group that represents the top European clubs. Because if you look at the structures of ECA, in particular their executive board, you will see that it is the elite clubs that can always obtain majority. And therefore, then the next thing would be the European Super League in 2021, right? And that is just the consequence of these governance structures, which actually led to it, and because of the growing gap in European football that were enabled by all that. And right now, I must mention, there is in 2023, there is a union of European clubs being at this very moment created in Brussels. The union aims to represent all clubs, in fact, and give voice to the unrepresented groups of clubs, which is probably it is a relative, or should be relatively uncontroversial proposition. That is something that we are working on currently. We will have our event in Brussels on 24th April also, and we will see if we can, in fact, via changes in the governance, effect also changes to the rules that will create a more equal, more sustainable ecosystem in football eventually.
And just a little bit of a follow-up here. So from a law perspective, what do you think has been the most significant that we that does not understand law perhaps should know?
From legal point of view, you do know, probably all of you, that currently there is a European Super League case pending, and we are awaiting for the decision of the court, which will come sometime, or is expected sometime in end of April and beginning of May or something like that. What is expected from that decision, what I expect is that it will enable, as actually already is enabled but not specifically pronounced by the court yet, the creation of alternative leagues will be allowed as it is now allowed, but the court will now specify that it is allowed. However, any alternative league that will be formed or has to be formed. Again, this is my opinion, and I expect this to happen. It will have to be formed on the basis of the requirements and the conditions set by UEFA in its regulatory role as somebody who controls the market. So in that sense, UEFA, I expect, will retain its regulatory monopoly, but will lose its commercial monopoly, at least on paper. Whether or not in practice that we will see European Super League, that is something that, well, we will see probably soon enough, in a couple of years, if this project that they started will actually go forward without English clubs as it is expected, and so on. So currently talking about your crossroads, that would be exactly, where European football is at right now. There is that structure of football which might change, but only on commercial side. Regulatory pyramid will stay intact. Again, my opinion, but we will see what the court will say.
Kenneth, you have a very interesting profile because you've been both in academia and also in practice. Looking at, the evolution the past 30 years, what do you see? Having been down there at the practice, but also up in the sort of academic helicopter.
Yeah, I see a few things. First and foremost, looking at the timeline, I think we cannot isolate things from time of context. So the Bosman ruling in the mid-1990s was a game changer. Also after the reformation and rebranding of competition formats and tournaments, whether it was the Premier League or the UEFA Champions League. And it turned everything into a players and agents market, and sometimes into the Wild West. We only need to go 5 years back until 2018 when a World Cup qualification match between Sweden and Denmark on the women's side was cancelled because of a labor dispute between the Players Union and DBU, or the Danish FA, also dealing with commercial rights questions. So along the way with Bosman ruling and more power to players, we saw increased polarization. Top clubs investing in more talents would gain more power over time. We have seen it with increasing revenues and the top clubs and the top 5 leagues taking their share. And then the next thing is the Moneyball that you mentioned here. Not only Moneyball, also the influence from technology, data, and digitalization, coupled or paired with globalization. So suddenly, a wider market space. And I think that was interesting because it's a new way to reach more fans and fans in new markets. And when you look at the commercialization of football, it's also a matter of conquering new markets in new ways. And technology, data, and digitalization provided that. We also saw it because that's the next thing, and it's not mentioned there. In the aftermath of COVID-19, suddenly clubs started to work with fan tokenization, squeezing the lemon of fans paying even more money to be faithful to their clubs. So I think also on the sporting side, we saw it with tracking, increasing the quality of the sport, the performances of the sports, and giving new pathways or avenues for commercialization. And that's part of the global game, because football has turned from way back being a public service product, a people's game, a local and a regional game, to being a global game. So a bigger economy, but also more polarized. So we have seen new governance questions arise also in the aftermath of COVID-19, which I think is a good thing and a necessary thing.
A key question for this panel was obviously, is European football in a crisis or not? Because when we prepared a little bit, we had the discussion, well, football is a little bit chaotic. It's a lot of emotions. So is there a crisis or not? Let's delve into that. Lars-Christer, what do you say?
Yeah, well, I think it's not a crisis, actually, because it's a permanent situation, which is always revolving. So there is no start and no end point to this crisis, because that will continue. And as you said also, for example, the development of the new technologies, that will mean a lot in the development of the sport itself also, and totally change, I think, the competition in a way in the future. And what we are seeing now, when all these cryptocurrencies are disappearing, and then they have to invest in something else that will be football, I guess, or some more sustainable things, or organizing things. And this new technology will give opportunities for other, let's say, parties on the media market to act, and that will definitely look different already in 5 years from now. That's my opinion.
Katarina, what do you say? Is there a crisis or not?
Yes, as you said, there is a permanent state of crisis, but this crisis seems to be a little bit more critical because of, there is crisis, and then eventually it reaches some breaking point, and I feel like we are almost there now in terms of, first of all, structures, the pending case court that I mentioned, the governance model, the rules that govern European football at the moment are also very, I would say, pulling further the group of clubs that is top, pulling them further away from the rest of the clubs. I can give a few examples. and I wrote some numbers down. For instance, out of the solidarity contributions, and solidarity contributions are the very rule that is meant and that is introduced to actually help out with competitive balance. However, even this very rule, 130 million in solidarity from Champions League, 45% of this amount goes to the clubs from Big Five leagues, and 55% goes to the 50, and that is for non-participating clubs, yeah, in Champions League. So we see how there is a big gap here between treatment of the big and the rest. And then you have a redistribution of revenues in Champions League, which most of you probably know about, that is also based, apart from the performance on the pitch, and there are starting fees, it's also based on the historical coefficients. It's based also on the size of TV markets where the clubs come from. So that the small and medium-sized clubs really cannot progress through this system that is meant and that is in a way created to entrench the existing dominances, right?
I have to say, if we look over time,
Yeah.
it was even worse before. I mean,
In which sense?
yeah, in for example, that the market pool was bigger and things like that. So I fully agree with you that this has to change, especially for those who are non-participating teams. Because otherwise it will definitely have a negative impact also on domestic football, of course, when it comes to
Definitely.
the competition.
Definitely. You have also the rules on international release of players. Every time a club releases players for international competition, they get compensated. However, even these rules are very much tilted in favor of the elite clubs, because out of 130 million that is distributed for the last Euro, 100 million went to clubs from Big Five league. So get that. There are 55 associations. Okay. And this is the type of situation that has led to the creation of ever-increasing gap between the elite, the biggest and best, and the rest. And then we are not really surprised to see those that, but I am always fascinated by it, that those that have argued for and worked for these rules to be installed in the regulations to govern European football are those very same clubs that are now pointing out how system is broken, how they need their own super league in order to create some balance. So proposition, again, that will benefit big clubs, and a proposition, again, that will take money out of domestic leagues and into the pockets of the elite.
Kenneth, what do you say when you hear this? So Lars Christer says, crisis or not, it's the same as always, it's a roller coaster. Katarina says, no, maybe not. What's your opinion?
I think if our understanding is to be found in language, what does crisis mean? It means that we may face some difficulties, or we have to answer some important questions. And if that's a definition, there have always been a threat from piracy leaks over the course of time. I'm a big, I'm not a supporter of that. That's a big problem. But we have faced some very difficult questions also after COVID-19. Yeah. You've seen FC Barcelona being in a very problematic situation because of mismanagement. Huge step level praise to the La Liga guys also in terms of installing new governance measures. We can look at the English game in terms of not only foreign private equity groups buying their way into football, but states buying their way into football, whether it's Qatar Sports Investments in Paris Saint-Germain, what happened in Newcastle related to Saudi Arabia, the Abu Dhabi group in terms of City Football Group. So I think this is also a matter of more politics coming into European football, if I have to relate to your model of passion, politics, and profit. I've lived in the US for 4 years. I'm not a big fan of pay-to-play models. I think football needs to be cohesive from the grassroots level all the way up to the top level. I think we need to protect the European model of solidarity. And I think we need to battle or tackle state-owned investments into football, because that's creating an even more uneven game. And we have seen recently that politics, not only football politics, is part of the game now. Also politics at the state level. So I think we will see a lot of new governance questions arising to tackle some of these difficulties.
There is an interesting regulatory matter now coming up in a discussion in England, I mean, where the Premier League is cautiously trying to say that you shouldn't regulate too much, and the politicians are intervening, of course. There is a need for regulations, definitely.
We have seen it in Denmark. One of the clubs in the second tier, Fremad Amager, was related to an investment group that had been, accused and even committed for fraud. So what happens? Politics, installment of new fit and proper rules in Danish football. And if there's a need, there's a need.
Yeah. If we say that European football is based on passion, but what you talk about is the influence of politics and profit during the last 30 years. Before we open up for questions, I want to hear your views on where do you see hope? Where do you see hope? If you point to one point, where do you see some hope? So we're not all that dark side. We need to match the bright side with the dark side. Lars-Christer, where do you see hope?
Yeah, there is a small part where I think actually UEFA made a reasonably good job, because I think there is a genuine feeling in Europe to support what we call the European sports model. But you have to go from talking to decision, because otherwise we will end up in the North American system. And I agree with, I think both of you, I guess, that this is nothing we would like to see in Europe.
Katarina, where do you see hope?
I would have to say in the changes to governance model, where I would want to see all the clubs equally represented. Without ability to represent yourself in the governance, there is no ability to progress in sporting and financial sense. And if we want to see more balanced leagues, if we want to see, again, things like Steaua Bucharest in 86, Red Star Belgrade in 91, and Porto, 2003, winning Champions League. If we want to see these small and medium-sized clubs be able to use what is supposed to be open system based on promotion and relegation, then this is the only way to do it, is give voice to these clubs to represent themselves, to in fact have an influence over the rules that are governing them. They are 95% at least of the professional clubs in Europe. That's the number that they represent. So we definitely need to give even a decisive influence over some rules to these clubs.
Kenneth, where do you see hope?
I see hope in terms of UEFA's willingness to change the governance game. You've seen FIFA, and the way they are acting at the moment. I understand why. It's an ego business. There are monetary reasons, to install more games in a very pressed match calendar, if you look at things from the sporting or the player's perspective. But we have seen, the unfolding also of a more broader game, the investments into women's football. I think that's very positive, because we also need to understand that younger generations, they grow up in different ways than all of us did. So we need to protect the game. We need to find future fans. I mean, that's how the game survives. We cannot distance or build silos between the professional game and the grassroots level. We need more cohesion, and I think UEFA and also some of the European leagues are working in that way, and that's very positive. And then I think with technology, data, and analytics, you also come to at least if it's applied in a competent way, to new ways of decision making where it's more accurate. You're not only betting on players, you are making more informed decisions. We have seen that with a couple of Danish clubs. FC Midtjylland is one example. FC Nordsjælland, that is now top of the league, is another example. And they have done so still with an emphasis on the cultural and strategic consciousness, because if you come from the US or from Saudi Arabia and you invest in European football without the strategic and cultural consciousness, you're not gonna succeed. Midtjylland succeeded because they had key players in key positions that also had the strategic and cultural understanding, because Danish football is Danish football. I know it has been more internationalized over the years, same in Sweden, same in Norway, same in Portugal, but we still need to have that consciousness to survive.
I think that is a great example before we open up for questions, because to me what you're saying is we need to combine the heart, the consciousness, with the brain, the data analytics. And that's sort of 1 + 1 = 3. I think that's a topic we will...
Yeah, my point was in terms of Midtjylland or FC Nordsjælland that there are a lot of complaints about foreign investments into Danish football, but this is just 2 examples of foreign investments where they succeeded in terms of elevating the sports product and the positioning of those 2 clubs. Yeah. So it's not all bad.
Yeah. Let's move over to questions. Let's see, I will have one mic here and another mic over here. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, please, over there. Andrea.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a question for the panelists, and I do see and agree. You agree that is an issue with the governance system, and as Martin pointed out, that in some way we see European football something like in between the American models and the Asian or Chinese model. We can say the same things about the States and European Union. So if you like to, right? The European Union is different than the States. And here my question to you about the ownerships models. How do you see the impact of different ownerships models? For example, 50+1, the socials, or other styles of ownerships has a possible problems, hinders in, for example, the evolutions, or possible crisis, or hope. So how do you see the different ownerships models in relation to the futures of football?
Please, anyone? Kenneth?
Yeah, if you speak about, for instance, German football, I really like their standpoint in terms of the European Super League. They said, you know, we're not going to be part of that, and that's easy to understand. I know that foreign investors bought their way into Hertha BSC. But anyhow, they have the 50+1 rule, they have coopetition, they have a strategy on fan welfare maximization. So that's just one example of a league that have done also fairly well in terms of a very high attendance level. And even mighty Bayern Munich, which is a global top club, they speak negatively about the current development in terms of how can we compete against states with just a club. So I think they came out as one of the winners of that situation with the European Super League. But that's just my personal opinion. Also because I believe that we will see new winds blowing in terms of the governance game led by UEFA.
Thank you. I think we will have a second question, and please state your name and your organization so everyone knows.
Hello, my name is Philip Lundberg. I'm from Djurgården Football Club. I'm head of sustainability there. I'm also part of initiative to work together with leagues, clubs, supporters and police authorities to create cooperation and a common way to address challenges in Swedish football. I wrote down a question before, and then the discussions turned very interesting. I'm going to try to summarize my question. It's mainly targeted to Lars Kister, but also, of course, invite the other as well. You had a picture there, Martin, with the crossroads, yeah. And that's the very foundation of the football game: to have rivalry, to have competition, and we fight each other on the pitch. The idea we also need beyond the pitch, we need to build alliances and find solutions. We speak here about the institution of UEFA, and we speak about different models, and there are different governance models in different European leagues. There are different supporter culture types, and there are different business models. So my question is, we need to find a hybrid, I think, and that's I know you like that expression, Martin. So my question is, if we try to address the challenges here, and we try to define a hybrid, if we take the best ideas, the best, smartest people, the best solutions from different leagues, because UEFA consists of leagues and clubs and supporters. If you choose, and with your experience, Lars-Christer, from Swedish football, from European football, club level, league level, if you would pick, let's say, 3 leagues, Swedish league, maybe La Liga, Bundesliga, or Premier League. If you create a hybrid model to address these challenges, what would you pick from each league? That could be the supporter engagement, it could be the business model, it could be the governance model. Just to explore on that, I think there's a solution in there somewhere to find alliances and find a hybrid model.
Thank you, Philip. Lars-Christer, please.
Yeah, it was an easy question. Yeah, of course. I give you the answers also. So if you just follow my advice, that will be no problem at all. I can give a guarantee. The problem is to execute it, of course. Yeah. But I think to be able to safeguard what I said before, the European sports model, which means that you should keep the dream alive, that you can move in the pyramid. If you are not making a good result, good enough, you should go down in the pyramid. If you are clever enough, you should be able to advance. And that needs, I think, some kind of guarantee for the influence of the members in a club. I'm not so. I don't know whether that is the 50+1 rule or if it's something else. And I'm sure if it's going to work, it has to be on a pan-European level. Each league or each national association cannot organize that on their own. So this is where there has to be some kind of political intervention in a way to paving the ground to be able to organize a model like that. And then, of course, at the end, there has to be a proper distribution of the means. As you were saying before, solidarity payments, it's not only handing 50 Swedish crowns getting less and less value. It's now even worse than the Danes. We cannot visit Copenhagen anymore, the Swedes, because we can't afford it. So there has to be pan-European solutions, and we have to see the market as a pan-European market, where rules should be able to influence all of them. Otherwise, we will never reach that aim.
I think I'll actually stop you there, because it's a great segue to our second panel, which will be about how do we get the fans and the supporters involved in this. And then we can bring this up of a pan-European. So let's thank panel number 1. And now, moving on to the second panel, let's invite Lena, Noah, and Isak. Let's give them an applause. Noah. So, panel number 2's theme is called Rowing in the Same Direction, involving fans on the success of European football. And with us here we have 3, I would say, great experts that I would love as guest lecturers here at SSE, so I'm very happy. So once again, a short introduction. Noah, please.
My name is Noah Bachner. I work as a journalist for the Swedish national newspaper Expressen. I have covered Swedish football for, I think it is 8 or maybe 9 years now, and more and more so as time has gone on, dwelled into these questions regarding governance and also Sweden's increasingly different position in the European and international landscape because of the 50+1 rule. I'm also a lifelong supporter of Newcastle United, and so I live with the experience of being thrown between Mike Ashley and the Saudi Arabian state.
Thank you. Lena, please.
Hi, my name is Lena Gustafsson Wiberg. I am supporter liaison officer at Djurgården, one of the few ones left since we implemented the role in Sweden 2012. So staying strong in the dinosaur corner there. I also work with Football Sports Europe, which is an umbrella organization for supporters all around Europe, who actually recently signed an MOU with UEFA to actually formalize the relationship between the stakeholders.
Very good. Isaac, please.
Yeah, my name is Isaac Eden, and I'm the chairman of SFSU, which is the football supporter union in Sweden, which is an interest organization with the supporter clubs for all elite clubs in Sweden. My club is Elfsborg, but we cooperate with all the other clubs to form an interest and drive supporter questions in Swedish football.
Thank you. Same format as the previous panel. We've prepared a slide with a number of pictures, but we will start with Noah. Noah, you're writing a book right now about the Swedish football system. So for those who does not really know Swedish football, what's the one-on-one on Swedish football that they need to know?
So the reason I'm writing a book is basically because of the governance of Swedish football and the position that has put Swedish football in this time where you can talk about a crisis. I would agree that there is a crisis going on. So the scene right now in Sweden is presents a very sharp contrast to, I think, lots of other leagues in Europe. It is manifested by the fact that we've had massive influence from the membership democracy that is in charge, more or less, of our football. It is visible in details like the fact that we are the one of Europe's top 31 leagues that don't have VAR implemented, and it is not looking like it's on its way either because of the fact that 18 out of 32 elite clubs in Sweden have now voted to work against it being implemented. It is visible in terms of details within clubs, like Hammarby, people ask every year, why is the roof not closed when it's snowing? It's because their members have told the club to keep it open. You can point to the fact that lots of Swedish elite clubs started women's elite teams in recent years, but they couldn't do it in whatever way they wanted, because in Malmö FF, for example, the members told the club to do it in a way that was more aligned with the values in terms of our membership democracy model, so they stopped them from picking up a place higher up in the league system. There are numerous examples, and I think what's important to take up when you consider the position that Sweden finds itself in right now is also the fact that this wasn't the case since forever. So there have been two different occasions in where we have had big debates and discussions and political processes regarding deregulating Swedish football and making it available to private investors. The first one was in the 90s, where it ended up in us creating the 50+1 rule. The second one was it went on from 2007 until 2013. And what happened when the decision was made then to keep the 50+1 rule in Sweden was that it activated the membership model in Swedish elite football. So there's been a very quick and dramatic, how to say this, activation, more or less. Yeah. It's people in Swedish football seem to have become conscious of the power they can exert on their clubs and on Swedish football in general. And interestingly enough, I think we're starting to see the same movements in Norway, which is probably the country in Europe that is easiest to liken to the Swedish model right now, where they have had the resistance towards the World Cup being played in Qatar and the calls for a boycott having sort of made the Norwegian membership system more aware of the fact that they can actually affect these things.
And I think it's interesting and worth also pointing out that in terms of the 3 Ps, in Sweden, out of the 10 million citizens, 1/3 is involved in a sports club. And out of that, 1/3, so 10% of all Swedes are a member of a football club, which means that the DNA and the historical roots in terms of how passion and politics has collaborated is extremely strong. And I think potentially that says, why is it so difficult to get the profit part into Swedish football? I think one, at least from an academic perspective, needs to understand the history and where Sweden comes from. Here on the slides, I want to start here on the top one and ask Isak, because actually if you can describe a little bit this picture. It was taken very recently, but I think it symbolizes something fantastic actually about Swedish football. So please.
Yeah, we had a meeting with the league, and we have that like every year or twice a year or whenever we need to have. And I think that's one of the key parts in evolving Swedish football. We're never going to be number one on the pitch, and that's, in my opinion, nothing even to strive about, especially now how the European football is governed. But we can be number one in fan involvement or supporter involvement. And yeah, we had a meeting in the league. We're discussing big, small topics, whatever we need to discuss. And it's not like only that we're speaking with each other, we also listen to each other, and we try to find common targets, common achievements. And also at the end, where we possible like a couple of years ago, we saw that, where there was a big discussion among police restrictions in Swedish football. The league actually spoke for their supporters and for the members. And that's would never happen like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, but that has evolved during these times, and I think we learned a lot on the top one picture there with the 51 plus rule, like 15 years ago. The supporter learned to cooperate with each other. There was no problem for a Djurgården supporter and an IAK supporter or an Elfsborg supporter to sit in the same room and want the same thing. Yeah. And that has evolved and takes the next step, and I think we're still progressing in that part. There's, of course, you're never going to be on the same page in every question, but as long as you're speaking with each other, then you can also achieve something. And that's what Swedish football should be about, and that's how we strive to be competitive and relevant. And I think instead of being number one European football league on the pitch, that's never going to happen, but our competitive advantage will be supporter involvements. And if we have those roots, then we can also attract interest and becoming better on the pitch as well. But without that, yeah, we're basically just like any other league, and we're screwed.
Yeah. Lena, I think you also have a very fascinating history here, being both on the supporter side, but also working for a club. I don't know if just to say that's very pragmatic Swedish, but I want to hear your views a little bit. You know, having worked in various types of communities here and also working on the European level, what would be your sort of 1-2 advice that other leagues in Europe can learn from the Swedish experience?
I mean, it's no secret that I grew up within the grassroots movement in Sweden. That's kind of what shaped me and has given me a lot all the way through life. It was kind of what kept our family together. That's what we gathered around. We were involved in our local clubs. So it's something I'm really, really passionate about. And obviously now working also on the elite side, you see some other angles of the whole game, and you need to try to once again combine heart, brain, and find the balance in there. I think Isak is on to something very important that we've seen, I would say, since the beginning of 2010s. The cooperation, especially with the league, but also with the National Association in Sweden and supporters, that there is a format created where the supporters are a recognized stakeholder. The expectation is to come to the table, speak to each other respectfully, and quite often agree to disagree. And that's okay. And that's actually bringing the game forward a lot more than maybe the wider community is aware of, because there's a lot of things going on all the time. But we also see it now on European level, and I think the supporter movement has realized that it's important to be organized in order to be recognized, because it's quite easy to step into a room and say, okay, I represent maybe this many people, maybe these groups. But to actually be formally organized in a way that also rhymes with the subculture that the support movement is tricky. But I think we see a lot of progress there, and I think actually the recognition by clubs, by leagues, by national associations and confederations is strengthening the supporter movement more than is being said.
Yeah. And on that note, so obviously it's not either or, it's perhaps both. And I think maybe that's a little bit Swedish here. So obviously, if you talk a lot about the passion side, you know, me being, as I said, an academic that has done a lot of work in financial regulation and accounting, you always come down to the budget. And if, you know, you cannot live on air, basically. And especially as we heard in the previous panel, when sovereign wealth funds come in and they can pour in money, how will the sort of the European supporter movement, you know, get some funds?
This is even more tricky now when you work as a supporter liaison officer, because I don't bring any money into the club. I cost money.
Yeah.
But hopefully, if the role is utilized in the best way possible, you can actually help to save time and money, because you're supposed to keep your ear to the ground, to be supposed to be aware of what's going on within the supporter movement, and to help the club to actually make the best possible decisions. You can't always make the right decision for everybody, but if we can be there, so it's tricky, as you say, and this is what I think everybody as an active supporter is debating. Obviously, you need funds to be able to grow, do things and stuff, but at what cost? Yes. And this is where integrity, morals, and different social heritage, because all these challenges look different in different countries as well, mostly due to social heritage, I would say. So it's something to consider, and it's something we work with every day, especially on pan-European level, to try to move the landscape into something that everybody can sign.
Yeah. And obviously one of the, I think, great things with a strong supporter movement is the sort of identity, sport as a religion, subculture atmosphere. And actually I've done some research about subcultures, and obviously one of the key tensions is always related to autonomy. On the one hand, it is the autonomy that really creates why it's so unique. On the other hand, you want to change the system, and therefore you need a little bit of independence. SSE being a business school, and as you can hear, that's a hybrid of business and a school. We have very strict, I should say, rules and routines. For we need the money, but we also have routines for how and from who we should take the money. Isak, who would the supporter movement accept money from?
I mean, that's always individually, of course, and I think you have to, the key part is to know why the money wants to come in the first place, because you can just, you know, go and find some money. It's not really that hard in 2023, but if you just lose your roots, then you won't attract any new money at the end, and then if you lose your roots and you fall, that will be devastating. So I think Sweden is kind of unique, and especially maybe not unique. Northern Europe and the Nordic countries are mostly on the same page. In those, like didn't want the World Cup in Qatar. There's a lot of discussion at the moment with betting money. There's a lot of things that supporters doesn't like, and at the end of the day, we speak about supporters, but at the end of the day, we're members, and there have been petitions and propositions for clubs to not accepting money from betting, example-wise, or in Norway there was a boycott in Qatar World Cup, and I think that would have been the same in Sweden if the question was alive at that moment. So I think it's in Elfsborg it might be one thing, and in Malmö it might be another thing, and in Djurgården it might be another thing, but I think at the end of the day it's about integrity and what the members of that club want.
Would you, because I think that raises an interesting issue, being that we're in academia. And in academia, one of the best things you can ever get is what's called basic funding from the government. Would the supporter movement accept basic funding from the government?
I mean, for SFSU, we get some basic money from the football league at today, and that's, I mean, you can always argue if we're going to be autonomy or independent, but that's also why I can be here, or why I can be in a meeting tomorrow with the league to discuss some scheduling issues. If we don't have any money, then there will be, I mean, during the pandemic we learned digital meeting, of course, but you want to see each other and have those conversations. So I think to a certain degree, you need that kind of cooperative and that money. And I think it's better to come from at least in our case, it's better with the league, because then we both know each other, then we're still really independent instead of attracting us like a sponsor or whatever. That's not going to be sustainable for a long time, and SFSU has been around for like 15 years. That wouldn't be possible without the league's support.
Would you, but answering my question, would you take money from the government?
I mean, with the right attachment, yes, but with the wrong attachment, no.
Because I think, given the history here in Sweden, that politics and passion has really collaborated very, very strongly over almost 100 years. When Noah and I, prepared this a little bit, we discussed this. Why isn't the Swedish government giving a grant to supporters? They give grant to municipalities and others, but they don't give a grant to supporters. If you would be the Minister of Sports here in Sweden, how would you...
I guess that's the $1 million question, how to support all the associations. We're talking about supporter cultures, of course, since I'm the chairman of that, but it's also about low league football clubs or low league supporter groups and stuff like that. So I think yes, because that's an important part of integration and society. And as you said, what was it, like 1 million people or even more probably that's involved in football clubs, and supporters or members are a really big part of that supported football.
Yeah. Noah, one of the things that's going to be in your book is obviously how Swedish fan culture stands out. But on the other hand, it's extremely important in such an interdependent system that football, and I should say all global sports are. What do you see as the sort of the biggest tensions when on the one hand, if we just analyze Swedish football, fan culture, professionalization, women's football, many things have been really good. At the same time, the distance to the big leagues are growing. What's your views on that potential tension between the local Swedish atmosphere and the link to the bigger system?
I think we have two problematic traditions in Swedish football. One is that we seem to put these different aspects of football against each other. So we have a good trend going on in terms of attendance, as people seem to go to the games and like the league. Yeah. Then we don't have to care so much that our teams are losing against teams from Moldova in the Europa League qualifiers. That seems to come and go. I mean, it was the same thing when we had these big fights about amateurism or professionalism in the last century, where people seemed to be happy that we were the moral champions of the world for a while, but we weren't very good at football. And these things seem to stick in a way. So I don't really agree with Isak saying that we shouldn't have the ambition to be a good European league or a good European footballing country, where Portugal, with the same number of people living there, can obviously have clubs going into the quarterfinals of the Champions League and actually make progress in Europe. So I don't like the argument that just because we have managed to preserve values in terms of culture and tradition and other aspects of our football, perhaps it's meaning to community as well, that we should be happy about what's going on footballing-wise. And that raises the question on how to get more money into the Swedish system, because obviously what has differentiated us from Denmark, for example, who went the completely other way at roughly the same time. I think the investment into Midtjylland was in 2014, which is a year after Sweden decided not to allow private investors into football, was that they not only did they get funding to start projects, but also more strategical alignment in how they did things. And that's really played out well for them, even though they've lost stuff that we've managed to preserve. So the big question is, how do you get funding into that? And I'm not I mean, short term, you can talk about putting as much money as possible into youth development and trying to sell players, which is the prevailing model in Denmark and in Norway. But the sustainable model for a long period of time, I think you need to involve the membership model to evolve. It needs to evolve as well. It needs to work differently in Sweden. It needs to reach more people, and for two reasons. One is that probably it can be a better source of income in different ways, but I also think that by tapping into larger parts of society and making it more available to lots of people, you could probably find ideas on how Swedish football should evolve through that. But I think there's a need to, I mean, it's difficult to just skip to the solution. I think we should identify in Swedish football that we need to find a model to finance better football and not let good atmosphere come at the expense of poor football.
Very good. I think given that we've talked many of the advantages of the Swedish model, it's always good if you start with the bright side to really look at the dark sides a little bit and pick your brains a little bit about self-reflection. So before we open up for questions, I would want to hear one thing that you think the Swedish football system should work more on. And we'll start with you, Lena.
I think it would be important to actually increase the engagement from the members.
Yeah.
If we're going to keep the system, we need to make sure that it is sustainable. I mean, I work for a club with 25,000 members, which is insane. But how do we reach them, and how do we get more of them engaged? It's important also to teach the members that obviously being a member in a club, you have a lot of rights, but with rights, responsibilities come. And that is something we need to make people aware of. We don't have to, as I said, agree, but at least we need to put the discussions on the table and try to work together and move things forward, kind of.
Thank you. Isak?
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing as Lena, as I usually do. But yeah, it's about enhancing the 51% rule. We had our annual meeting like last week. We were, I think, 150 people. It's I mean, it's a really good model, but obviously there's room to be like 1,000 or we're 2,000 members. We should be 5,000 members. That's also monetizing the memberships, but also increase and protect the 51% rule, because now it's open and vulnerable for criminal stuff for that matters, and also part that you don't really want in a club. So enhancing the 51% rules and engage more members, that's the key.
Thank you. Noah, finally.
Can you repeat the question?
So, given that we've talked about the advantages of the Swedish model, where do you see the biggest improvement potential?
Yeah, so it's try and say something different than growing the membership model. I'd say that it needs to be advocated for the best for the rest of Europe as well, because we cannot keep looking at ourselves as a happy little island doing things differently, sort of retreating into this VAR-less membership world where nothing else matters. That's not reality, really. Sweden is part of European football, and we have a too low sense of belonging in European football, I think, in Sweden. We debate questions that are really, really important to us because they're important to European football as well. So I'd say that it's a big question for the people running Swedish football, but also for the supporters movement, to try and advocate our model and what can be learned from it, because if the rest of Europe is doing well and not heading for a crisis, it's better for Sweden as well.
Great. With that, we'll open up once again for this second panel. We have a question over there. So Lennart, in the middle. And you can also stand up and say who you are. Thank you.
Hi, Eric Nilsson is my name, and I'm working at a PR agency, but that's maybe not so relevant. But I'm a very passionate IFK Gothenburg supporter, and as probably all know, we play on real grass, and I know that your clubs play on artificial turf, and for me it's kind of strange that we don't fight more against artificial turf, because it's not football in the real sense of the word, I think. Do you think that artificial turf is a problem for Swedish football? And this is a real question. I'm curious to know.
Thank you very much. I think this is what I love, this type of nerdy question that is almost about you are being unfaithful to the true world of football. Thank you very much. Anyone that wants to start? Isak.
I mean, I think that's the beauty with the 50+1% rule, that you can discuss those kind of questions, but you can also have should we have a plastic membership card or not? Both of those questions have been as a proposition in our annual meetings, and we have but you also have to face the reality, and also speaking about governance, because a lot of Swedish football stadiums is owned by the or by the city, or usually or the municipality, and there's the money question coming in, because they want the pitch to be used like a 1,000 hour per year instead of like 400 or 500 hours. I think it's an important question, and I think a lot of supporters should be more engaged in that question and affect their own clubs. But at the end of the day, I understand the other part of that question, but I think you should really try to affect your club and try to change that decision, because of course I want as well as my club should play on real grass, and that's how football should be played at, and I think that's also a competitive advantage at the end of the day.
Lena, please.
Yeah, I love the question because it's quite common perception from supporters to clubs who plays on real grass that we don't care. I can assure you we care. Even though I might not be the loudest one on Twitter or stuff like that, we do debate this obviously, but we also need to look at what we're working with. At the moment, we're tenants at a multi-purpose stadium in Stockholm. Obviously, we advocate for the fact that we want to have proper grass in there, but at the moment, it's quite a long way to go to reach it.
Thank you. Do we have any final question? Yes, please.
So, hi everyone, my name is Eric Hermansen. I'm a second year bachelor student here at the school. So basically my question, it kind of connects to the first panel, but I guess I can ask you guys as well, and perhaps is anyone else of you guys could have an answer to my question, please come up to me afterwards or something, because I want to know, or a thought of mine is kind of related back to the European Super League initiative and the fact that it failed so incredibly miserably. Like, how is it possible that Fiorentino Perez and like the other sporting directors of the founding clubs of the Super League, how could they not have anticipated all these protests from former players and fans? Like, how could they not have seen that coming? Did they not involve the fans in the decision-making process? A similar instance is villkorstrappan, obviously, here in Sweden. And one thing that I think is overlooked in this is, given the launch of the Super League, the new format of the Champions League was kind of overlooked in that sense. How do you think supporters will react to that new format of the Champions League, and why do these projects fail so miserably? Because for me, I think it's about a supporter issue, that supporters are not involved. What's your take?
Before we get this going, because this is a great coffee discussion, short answers from the panel, and then I'll introduce the coffee. Anyone?
I can start.
Lena, please.
Obviously, it was quite clear that the Super League initiative, there was not a lack of, there was no transparency, no supporter involvement. Hence, it backfired quite majorly. We've seen things like this in the past, so honestly, I don't know how you could have not anticipated it. It still amazes me. I think, in general, as I said, involvement is getting better. We're getting there. Myself haven't been a part of it, but I know that there's been discussions with support stakeholders and UEFA on the new format for Champions League and so on. But the Super League was just, I don't know, coffee.
Yeah. I would say no, exactly. You know, from a journalistic perspective.
Yeah, I view the reactions to the Super League as a confirmation of the fact that many of Europe's biggest clubs have been quite successful in betraying their supporters, that they are part of a community project and a family. So you could hear supporters, ex-players, pundits, whoever is sitting down saying the exact same things when it happened. Football is about community. This isn't just a business. The problem for them is that it is just a business. These clubs are international entertainment businesses. So that collision was waiting to happen in one way or another. It was the first time it became painfully clear, I think, to many supporters, especially England perhaps, that their clubs are not viewed by their owners as community assets, but rather as international businesses.
And I should say, and maybe now when we leave for a little bit of a coffee break, I'm sorry, my role as a moderator, is this tension really? Sport or football as a product versus sport and football as a religion. And obviously, you know, if you go to business schools and you listen too much on people like myself, then you fail miserably. So hopefully out there you will have great discussions on this topic. We will be back in 20 minutes. So it's 20 to 7. So please, let's thank the panel first.
I was on my way to the top, yeah. Crowd surfing on the back, yeah. Champagne cherry on the top, yeah. Hotel rooms riding in the front, yeah. But I was always dreaming about something else. I was always hungover and sad in that place. I was always dreaming about something else. And when I closed my eyes, I could see you. I was on my way to the top, yeah. Jerking off to pictures of myself, yeah. Cocaine party and I was going topless. Heavy drinking, belly shots, yeah. But I was always dreaming about something else. I was always hungover and sad in that place. I was always dreaming about something else. And when I closed my eyes, I could see you. When I close my eyes, I can see you. When I close my eyes, I can see you. When I close my eyes, I can see you. When I close my eyes, I can see you. I was on my way to the top, yeah.
White lips, pale face, breathing in snowflakes, burnt lungs, sour taste. Lights gone, days end, struggling to pay rent, long nights, strange men. And they say she's in the class A team, stuck in her daydream. Been this way since 18, but lately her face seems slowly sinking, wasting, crumbling like pastries. And they scream the worst things in life come free to us, 'cause we're just under the upper hand. I'm go mad for a couple grams, and she don't wanna go outside tonight. And in a pipe she flies to the motherland, or sells love to another man. It's too cold outside for angels to fly. For angels to fly. Ripped gloves, raincoat, tried to swim, stay float, dry house and wet clothes. Loose change, banknotes, too cold outside for angels to fly. Angels to fly. Fly, fly. For angels to fly, to fly, to fly. Angels to die. Me and God have been talking again, but it's too soon to call us friends. He still won't carry the weight of the world, just keeps listing off all my sins. Me and God have been laughing again. It's always funny reading passages, but he's still quiet at least half of the time, and I'm left with unread messages. So many voices shouting so much noise, and I'm not listening anymore. Me and God have been singing again. I play piano and try to follow him, but it's always songs about glory and pain. I prefer the instrumental hymns. So many voices shouting so much noise, and I'm not listening anymore. Be better, live smarter, go further and less time.
Bra, nu funkar det. Welcome back everyone. So I'll try the mic, please. The break is over. So please everyone take your seats so we can start the second half. Ja. Du får ställa en fråga. All right, everyone. Great to see and hear the bus. Please take your seats. Bra, Lina. So please come in. Juan, I can see you. Get everyone in here. All right, so let's see. Do we have? Please come in. So we can get going for the second half. Great. Some last-minute strugglers here. Jonas, come in. This is like students, or almost like your kids. You know, you need to be firm. Very good. So welcome back. As I said, it's great to hear the energy. Maybe not like a football game, but almost there. And now we're moving into the second half. So having heard about why European football, let's say, is in a challenging situation. Maybe the crisis is always there. Maybe there is a little bit more crisis than normal. First panel. Second panel, highlighting a little bit what's different here in Sweden. And I would specifically want to emphasize two things. The first thing is the idea of collaboration and dialogue. And maybe if you want to be a little bit devil's advocate, you would say, Swedish people are afraid of conflict, so that's why we have a lot of dialogue. But I think in some sense it has been a success factor that we reach out as a small country to really reach pragmatic solutions. And the second point here is really understand the historical roots, how passion and politics has worked together in Sweden. And I think that's why the Swedish system, perhaps I don't know enough about Denmark, but perhaps that's why we see a little bit of a difference. Because in Sweden, the government has helped out in a number of ways. Now, second half, we have the third panel, and then we have the closing remarks from President Tebas. So with that, as we see here, shaping the future, what will football look like in a decade? So, once again, you know the format now. Let's welcome up Karl-Erik, Siri, and Jonas on stage. Very good. Jonas, please, 1 minute. Introduce yourself.
Yes, I've been almost every stakeholder within the football family. As a player from the age of 5, as a supporter from the age of 6, supporting my local team, IFK Luleå, who was 1 goal from reaching Allsvenskan once upon a time. As a referee from the age of 13, during 31 years, reaching World Cup, European Championships, as well as Champions League, 47 matches. Working in the TV side of the business, trading rights, distributing digitalization of broadcast rights, working with football clubs, event organizers, and leagues during 13 years. When my career was over, I started working in television and football again as a pundit for SVT and Discovery Networks, also investing in different companies, a few related to football, other sports activities as well. Today, in the grassroots again, with my daughter, 14 years old, coaching referees locally in my hometown, Sigtuna, developing and inspiring referees to get into the most difficult job in the business.
I would say, as a professor here at the business school, I think we're underplaying the role of referees. I was a referee when I was younger. I think that's the best leadership education you can get. But that's not the main topic. Siri, please.
So I just realized I'm the only one on stage who hasn't been a referee then. Yeah. Yes, okay, great. So Siri Valenius is my name. I'm head of international relations at Malmö FF. I worked there since a year when I moved back to Sweden from Switzerland. In Switzerland, I was working for ECA, or ECA, or the bad guys, as you also can call them, the European Club Association. I was there for a number of years, working in the membership department, also working with development. So we're working with women's football, youth football, esports, everything that needed to be developed by European clubs. We used to say we were the equivalent of maybe 3 or 4 UEFA departments or something like that in this small organization that has the blame for everything and needs to solve all the big problems, is what I hear. But after that, I was also working as a consultant for 2 years for my own kind of boutique advisory called Club Affairs. And then after 2 pandemic years in Switzerland, I moved back to Sweden. So now I'm very proud to be here on stage and
represent Malmö FF. And I know Lars Christer had a point on your outfit.
Yeah.
And I must say it's a beautiful color you're wearing, and I'm very happy about it. And I also like the sky blue, setup behind here. So very nice. What I'm not very liking here with the sky blue shirt you have here is the little UEFA. No, you have the little UEFA outfit on there. I just wanted to point out the devil is in the detail. So please.
Please, Karl-Erik.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking notice. I'm Karl-Erik Nilsson. I was brought up in the southeast of Sweden in a part called Småland, the Scottish part of Sweden, as we used to say. In a local club, did more or less everything. I was a player, I was a leader, early stage leader, and then started to be a referee also. But as a chairman in a local club, you also had thoughts about the local municipality, so I got involved into politics. I was the mayor in this municipality for 12 years, and combined that, actually, the refereeing career went pretty well. Not as well as Jonas, but I did some 150 matches in the Swedish top division and 10 years internationally. So I had the combination of being a mayor and an international referee. Not a very common combination. You don't get so many applause when you have that type of combination, I can tell you. Left politics, moved to the West Coast, engaged in a new club where my youngest son started to play, got into the board. I'm still in the board in this third division club, also in the local presidency of the region, and then 2011 into the Swedish FA board, 2012 Swedish FA president for 2 more days, and then finally UEFA vice president since 2017.
Impressive panel. Let's look into the picture of the final panel. And here we're coming back to 2 SSE parts here. First of all, except for the 3P model, the cage. Because I think what's really fascinating is that on the one hand, you cannot function in football unless you respect and understand the history and all the rituals. On the other hand, it's exactly that passion and history that potentially prevents you from moving into the future. So I'm a little bit curious throughout the debate here to hear your views on when should you fly out and when should you potentially fly back. So we'll start with Karl-Erik, please.
First of all, I would like to express our big thanks to the Stockholm School of Economics and to you personally, Martin, for this heavily engagement in this excellent evening. And also thanks to the speakers and guests, of course. And this is a good thing also to be in line with the Swedish presidency of the European Union, having this taking place here. Almost 2 years ago, we had this announcement of the breakaway and creation of the European Super League. And it was amazing to see all the football stakeholders standing up against this proposal. But that was not enough. Also, the big protests from politicians all over the continent. That was great to see. Everyone was, at that stage, defending the European sports model, which is crucial. We speak about promotion and relegation. We speak about grassroots. We speak about solidarity, social, and also the national identity. And in my perspective, it's important to stick with the cornerstones: democracy, solidarity, and a holistic view. And this has also a big effect on future investments into women's football and also into other parts, different parts of the grassroots football. There is a great potential if we do this well, but there is a big threat if we do mistakes. If I mention something about democracy, when normally nowadays, clubs, leagues, associations, fans, we sit together, different stakeholders, and discuss, and then we take a democratic decision. And we invest nowadays also the profit back to the football family. That's a part of the European sports model. The profits from the club competitions goes back to the clubs, and the profit from the national team competitions go back to the association to develop football in various ways throughout Europe. And I'm chairing the UEFA Hat-Trick Committee, perhaps one of the world's best solidarity and development programs. The income and the resources that comes from the men's Euro goes back to the 55 national associations. From next cycle, it's 20% more than previous cycle. For the 55 national associations in Europe, there will be 17 million euro distributed next cycle. This is under big threat if we do mistakes. Speaking about solidarity, football in Europe, it's not a profit machine for a few top clubs. It is for everyone. And solidarity and redistribution, that's a crucial and important part in the European sports model. And I think that the discussion about the European Super League, that is really a big threat to these cornerstones and discussions about democracy and solidarity. And saying some words about women's football, it's amazing development now. It's growing all over the world. But still, there is a need for much more investment to get more girls into the women's game. There is a gap closing better and better between the men's game and the women's game. But if we don't get to the federation this investment money for the girls' game, then there is a big risk that there will be a stop in the development in the women's game. So I think this breakaway threats is a threat against these cornerstones and also development of the women's game, and a holistic view is for that reason necessary. Finally, this has also an impact on the grassroots areas, boys and girls, health and welfare and so on. UEFA did 2018 a social return of investment study of grassroots football, and Sweden was one of the pilots together with Romania to see what effects due to economy and due to the social benefits. And if you just remember one thing, you can remember that 1 invested euro from the society gives 10 euros back to the Swedish society. So of course, if we don't have these resources, there is a big risk that the football that we are used to will be totally different in the future. So that's why it's so important to work against these breakaway thoughts. So it's like the shiny sign on the right, democracy and solidarity, but I think that is really crucial that we stick to this. Then we can have still a good future, I think.
Thank you, Karl-Erik. Siri, with your experience, what type of football world do you envision in a decade?
Well, I'm happy that you touched on the women's football there, because there's been an increased an amazing growth in the last couple of years. So just 10 years from now, that was my first thought when you kind of mentioned this a decade from now. I don't think we really can envisage what we're there. But there's a few things, as you say, that we actually need to invest in to be able to be there, because currently I don't see the investments being done properly from UEFA, and I think it should be the clubs that drive these kind of growth within the clubs games. And for instance, I was speaking with AS Roma for a couple of weeks ago. I was there to visit them in Rome, and they asked us, okay, so in Sweden you're really good at women's football, so what do you do there? Can we learn from you? And you saw yesterday the numbers they had in the Women's Champions League game were amazing. So Italy is really on the rise on women's football. But the specific question they were asking me was actually around coaches. Because they said that when they speak to the other top clubs in Europe, they're not meeting their KPIs right now of having women working as coaches in the coaching staff, because there are no women. So I think we need to kind of, invest in more women being not just players, but also coaches, referees, because we have a gap there. And I mean, now looking at who will be your successor afterwards, there are 2 men now, and for the other position as well. I mean, we don't have any women in those kind of roles, and we haven't really, even Sweden as a country, haven't really been good at developing that and fostering that, and to have more women working in the industry. So I think that's a very important point there. And I think the real, driver of this should be the clubs, and to be able to get them to actually be able to develop this, because right now focus, at least from UEFA and FIFA side, is always the national team game. So you invest in the Women's World Cup that will be this summer, or the Euros, but that's not where we, develop the talents. That's not where we kind of grow the game. We need to invest in the clubs. That's very important, because only that way we can get more players, more coaches, more staff, and more everything. So that's why I envision that we need to invest in the club game. So, well.
Would that be a concrete KPI in a decade, that we wouldn't actually talk about equality because it would be so natural that when we have a presidency for the Swedish FA or some other top position, we would have equal numbers of males and females?
I hope so, but I also heard that one of the candidates who was a woman running for this election of being the chair of the Swedish Association, actually she heard that Sweden is not ready, the Swedish football movement is not ready to have a woman as a chairman. This is 2023 and we're not ready to have a woman as a chair. It's a bit crazy. So I think we really need to kind of foster that and build it long term, because we can just not find them like that. We need to actually approach them, ask them. And with women, you actually need to do a little bit more effort. First in identifying them, but you also actually need to not just ask once, but actually twice and 3 times. It's the same time when you ask me to be in this panel, I'm like, should I be with these 2 gentlemen? And you're saying, well, Siri, you worked in Switzerland in football. How many Swedes have actually worked at the European Club Association? I'm the only one. So actually, yes. But you actually had to kind of coach me and be here, because otherwise we will say no to these kind of things. So it's very important to kind of be persistent and actually ask them several times and find the right people to do so.
I think here what we have is perhaps a little bit of the Swedish model, because obviously democracy, grassroots, first choice, equality is the second part. I would say innovation and digitalization is something at least we Swedes proud ourselves of. And now actually, also preparing this a little bit, we're going to combine, Jonas, your 2 passions, refereeing and media, into what you see in the future. So let us see here.
Potentially.
Get this going. Here we actually have a potential innovation. Jonas, please, tell the audience.
We looked about how football will look in a decade, and we know all that football has expanded the number of tournaments, the number of matches, the formats are increasing. We're moving certain competition to other countries, which means traveling time and so on. I mean, we'll come to a point, if we haven't reached it already, where we cannot play any more matches. So the revenues from the number of matches will be maximized. So how could the game, football, then get more revenues? And tapping into my 2 interests, as you say, refereeing and digitalization and broadcast rights. Is this the future? What do we like to explore? Would we like to hear more from the field of play, from the officials, from the referees? We see the players today, the male players, always like this. You don't get to hear anything. Whereas if you look at other sports, NBA, for an example, you hear everything they say. It's bringing me closer to the game. I, as a customer, would be keen to pay more. And if I would be able or keen to pay more, the rights holders would be probably interested to pay more money. And if you move that to other sports like handball, which is a very popular Swedish sport, we all seen the big championships, they have a microphone, you get to hear everything what they will do, and that brings me closer to the game, closer to the personalities. And I think to bring that into the female aspect, maybe because we know all the female football stars are more open, more accessible, they do more interviews, maybe they would open up to this. Maybe they would be more keen to explore this opportunity, which could then bring more money into the game. Maybe a women's game would be more interesting if you get to hear the communication between the referees and the players, between the officials, hear what's happening in the dressing room. Maybe that could be something. Of course, integrity at one side, money into the game at another side, and create a new kind of sports, which we are discussing at the moment.
Do you think it would affect who would actually volunteer to be a referee? Because I can see on the one hand that, if everyone hears what you're saying, being a referee is only one part of what you do. You're actually, a little bit of a, star. You need other types of qualities. Will that affect, because we already have a challenge of the number of referees, or do you actually think that, I'm not going to call it the football referee influencer, but you know what I mean? No. Would it actually increase the likelihood of getting more referees? What's your view there?
Transparency. Tell everyone what you're doing. You're not hiding anything. It's good for the game. It's good for the neutrality. You don't have discussion about the certain referees supporting certain teams or that the VAR are supporting one side or another. As a referee, if I go back to my career, I wouldn't mind my communication be explored. I should always work in such a manner that whatever I say to whoever, it should be official, it should be open, and you could press the play button at any time. So every time I went into a match, it was recorded. I listened to it myself to improve my communication, but also between me and the players at every point.
I'm a big rugby fan, and they have that a lot. Yeah. So you can hear everything going on the pitch. So yes, but I believe what you say. Yes, we are also seeing that in women's football, that you can do slightly different things, and you're not as locked down with these kind of regulations. And like, I think in the end, it's kind of safeguarding the referees. That's why you cannot hear them. But maybe you're not actually not doing them a favor. But what I wanted to say is that I'm also a little bit into what you were saying with the bird. You know, should we protect or should we, explore with women's football? Sometimes with women's football, it tends to be kind of the guinea pig of things. So you can test things there. And when I was working at ECA, I was the project lead of the Women's Champions League format reform. And we got a lot of brilliant ideas from the UEFA competitions department, but it was sometimes, they wanted to test things with the women's format, and we're like, take it seriously. You need to so in a good way, if you keep the balance.
Exactly, because you don't have to do it live as we saw here. This was, of course, you could do it live delayed, or you could do in terms of highlights, or maybe 15 minutes after the match, you get to hear the communication from 3 situations. I'm sure every rights holder would love it and would be inclined, or at least be positive to pay a higher rights fee. The viewers will for sure love it, because this is a new world. You're everywhere. You're in the dressing room with documentaries, but here you get one more dimension of the game, which I think everyone could benefit from.
Karl-Erik, so obviously football is a game that has been ongoing for, some say, several hundred years. What do you envision in 10 years? Let's say that you would have a bright scenario and a dark scenario. Let's start with a bright scenario. What would that look like?
Yeah, but the bright scenario is that we still can even better involve all the stakeholders. And I think that we overall must do what Siri said. When we speak about women's football in an international perspective, then Sweden seems to be best in class. But when we speak about it among ourselves, we still have a lot of challenges. Just to remind you, Siri, the board in the Swedish FA is the majority is women. So we are really ready for women and female leadership. So there is. And if we also can stick to the values, I think you said football is conservative, but that means that it's also predictable. We know what we want to get from a football match, and if we can deliver that and don't make things too complicated in the future, then I think this will be a solid ground to stand on. But on the other hand, I will repeat it again, if we allow some of the riches to break away, to take the profits and put them in their own pockets, then we destroy the entire football, from the smallest boy and girl who wants to start in the local club, because the resources will be taken away from them. So there is a big threat, but there is also perhaps a bright future.
Siri, if you can affect just 1 or 2 things, except for women's football, what would that be, that in 10 years you will look back and say, this really made a difference?
Well, I was looking at the timeline that you put before, and it's funny how I usually say that the best part of my job, especially when doing these kind of things with the Women's Champions League format and kind of doing the analysis and simulations and these kind of things, is kind of to predict the future. So what will this lead to? And also kind of see, okay, what consequences will it have? So, I mean, with the Bosman ruling, as we said, it had consequences that we could not anticipate when it happened. So, I mean, with just a small change like that could really just alter things. So I know that now we have the new agent regulations in place, for instance. Before it was regulated, you needed to have a license to be a football agent, or an intermediary, as it's called. But then they took it away. They kind of released the market and became Wild Wild West. And now they're trying to put it in again. So it's kind of doing the analysis of what will that create? Will that have side effects? What kind of markets, black markets, are we opening up for? So these kind of things is very interesting to kind of analyze and look forward to.
Jonas, what do you say? In 10 years' time, except for digitalization and innovation, where do you see the potential?
I see the potential in the sports being open, that you could elevate through systems and that you could also be relegated. That my team, IFK Luleå, could beat Sirius Malmö FF in the Swedish Cup still. That it's possible that the small team could beat the bigger one. That we have those challenges.
In theory.
In theory, yes. We lost 1-0. Wrong penalty, no, it wasn't.
Not so far away.
Not so far away, no. But that kind of...
Be careful.
So, talking about pitch quality. Well, okay, we can take that later.
And artificial grass as well, yes.
If that's what you call it,
but
grass.
that philosophy, because that keeps the football open always, that it's not predictable. You cannot know. It's not... Today we work with Excel sheets, with AI. We could predict everything, expected goals. No, that has nothing to do. Football is something live which happens, and it could change in every second of the game. That's the fantastic with football. And the moment when I know how the game will end, and there are lots of threats to this, of course, with manipulation of matches or too much scientific aspects into the game, then I will stop watching it. But as long as we are the unpredictable, I will be a major fan for sure.
We will open up a little bit questions from the audience. Yes, we have one question there and then one question here. Please make it.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for a very interesting talk. I have many questions, but I'll keep it short. My name is Jamil, and I'm an SSC alumni, presenting myself today. So this is more of a fan question, if that's okay. I have non-fan questions, but you know, whenever I or anyone else is watching a football game live, you see many people screaming at the referee for a variety of reasons, possibly. I was wondering what goes through your head as a referee when that situation happens, and do you ever think like, wow, they have a point, I might change?
Karl-Erik, you can start, and then we go to the expert.
Because I was a more historical referee. I stopped 20 years ago. But you know, the thing is, when you come to the level that we have been, then we have refereed so many matches. You have a lot of experience when you're there. And what is the fact is, the reaction comes always after you have taken the decision. So the reaction doesn't come before. So it's always a reaction. So I think for that reason, it's easier to deal with, and then you can be sure. You cannot think so many seconds about that. As soon as there is another, and another, and another. So I think it's pretty okay. You don't take it too seriously, to be honest. It's a part of the game that you get criticized.
And two aspects from my side. It's actually worse to referee Division 5 with 80 spectators, because if someone says, you're shit, you get to see them in the eye. It goes directly in here. And at that time, when I was 17 or 18, when I was at that level, it was, oh, I am shit. Am I shit? I refereed a match in Munich, Allianz Arena, 70,000 people. I gave a penalty against Bayern Munich. 70,000 people screaming, hating me. And I was looking, okay, am I the only one making the correct decision in here? So you get tougher by the time, and you are so focused that you don't hear too much what they're saying at that time, which is good, because then probably you won't be influenced by the decisions you make.
Thank you very much. If I may add really quick, we were talking about like publicizing what you're saying and what others around you are saying. Like, what percentage of the things are maybe allowed to be published? I mean, in terms of vulgarity, maybe, or how?
No, I think I have nothing to hide. So if a player is using an abusive language, or a coach, I don't mind. Record it, just play it out. Because maybe that would enhance or improve the working environment for the referees. I know in England they start with grassroots referee having body cam to minimize the physical aspects or the physical abuse towards the referees, and this has actually led to some improvements. So maybe we have to come that way, which of course is unfortunate, but maybe that's the route to go down.
All right, we have one question there and then one question there. Please.
Hi, my name is Malik Minarji, and I'm a first-year alumni here at SEC. I've written my question down because I'm pretty nervous. So this question is open for all the panelists. How do you think that the emergence of leagues such as the Kings League will affect the world of football in the future?
The Kings League?
Piquet's league.
Sorry?
The league which Piquet has created.
Ah, Piquet.
Piquet, this new format.
Yeah. Well, yes. Interesting question, actually.
We leave that to Javier afterwards.
Exactly. That's an interesting one. Well, actually, that is kind of seen as a threat to clubs in a way. I mean, we want to preserve the structure that we have, that we're playing against each other, and I guess for the national teams as well. I think one kind of, you were talking about these scenarios 10 years from now. What could be like the dark one? It could be, what if the players say, screw the clubs, screw the national teams. We go play Messi and Ronaldo. We're going to do, a 5-on-5. We'll bring our best mates than we used to. I mean, then the whole structure would fall down. Then maybe no one will come to our games. That's a very dark scenario. But actually, we see from time to time these kind of things being created and kind of, So in one way, we always try to say that, look, the club is bigger than the individual or the supporter. At least that's very important for us because, you never know what will happen with a player that you foster and then he flies out to the birdcage out in the world and he makes statements about Qatar and everything. So, that's why it's important that we're not just seen as one player. We're actually a club and we're actually 10,000 supporters working for it. So, does anyone else want to?
It was a short comment. Otherwise, I think actually, given the time, we'll take that question, and then it's time to move on.
Thank you. Reza Malik Zadagan. My day job is I'm an investment banker, but at night I'm a big fan, sports fan. So I'm actually watching a lot of football. I like your comments, Mr. Eriksson. You're always transparent, and then you advocate transparency. One of the things that I think I see in a financial world called shadow banking, and I think listening to you, I see a lot of shadow football and corruption. How do you see solving that problem?
Well, going back to the words you're using is transparency in every aspect of the game, from every actor to be able to be open and communicate what you're doing and when you're doing it. And I think when the sport is starting, let's say from the refereeing side, which is my background, to be open and transparent, that's one start at least. But now everyone is sitting down, digging down in the trenches, and nobody really wants to do it first. And I think that transparency, of course, if this is being done properly over the years, it will increase the popularity of the sports, because a lot of people following the sports, like yourself, are following the sports with the dubies that you're mentioning now at the moment.
Have we had any question from a woman in the auditorium yet?
Please.
There.
Funny.
Microphone.
Microphone.
No.
No.
People are watching online.
No, hi, my name is Fanny. So I'm a doctoral student here, and I'm also working at Center for Sports and Business. And I was just wondering, how are you thinking when it comes to the future of player transfers when it comes to women's football? Because you talked a lot about grassroots football, and I mean, in Sweden we have a lot of grassroots football when it comes to women. We have a lot of young girls playing football, but when you look at player transfers in the males league, like, we're often selling to a bit bigger club, but we're not selling to the major clubs. And when we look at women's football, like nowadays we can see that we have some transfer to like Chelsea, for example. So I was just wondering, like, where do you see Sweden in the future of the supply chain of women's football?
I can comment on that. What you are raising is a major problem and a major discussion within the women's football family, because Sweden is a talent factory. We produce a lot of young players. And when the big clubs establish female teams, they don't take them from the beginning and grow them themselves. They bring in players from abroad, and for this reason, there must be a system. There is a working group within FIFA to find out a system where also there can be a reasonable pay to these clubs who have brought up these talented players, and they cannot take them for free in the future. So this is a crucial and important issue, but we have found a discussion part within the FIFA family, and hopefully there will also be a result sooner than later, I hope.
Can I add one thing there? One thing that might be a bit technical, but it's a thing called training compensation that exists in men's football, but it actually doesn't exist in women's football. There are a number of things that actually exist in men's football, regulations and so on, that doesn't apply to women's football. Training compensation is one of them. So that's the one where you actually produce a talent and you have them in your academy, and then maybe Malmö would sell to, you know, another club, and then that club would sell it to Chelsea, then some money would go back to Malmö. That doesn't exist in women's football. And there's been working groups and working groups on this to try to, because it's not as simple as just copy pasting from the men's, because the training compensation system is not really working. So we need to find a proper way to apply it to women's football. But I could speak for ages about this, so let's go on.
I should say that Fanny's thesis here is really about how do you, as a club, work with equality when you have a male's team and a women's team and all the practicalities. So for those of you here in the audience or maybe online, Fanny Almersson at SSE, I should say I'm the proud supervisor.
we can have a new panel
Yeah.
another
Exactly.
day
Yeah,
about
exactly.
So
this.
that's something we're thinking about. With that, let's thank these. Thank you very much. Thank you. Before we move on to the final summary by President Tebas, very important part. So we'll do this as I do with my students. So first, here you have the on and off. On the one side, you have English or Spanish. On the other side, you have the volume. To be clear, is there anyone that does not understand? Ask your neighbor. So with that, let me introduce the final speaker of tonight. And with this, I also want to thank especially the La Liga team that helped us introduce this evening, and especially Juan Fuentes Fernandez, who has done an amazing job with this event. But with that, President Tebas, the floor is yours. Let's give him a hand.
Dropped me in a parachute to be the president of La Liga. For more than 5 years, I was a president of a club from the 4th division in Spain, in a city which had 50,000 inhabitants. And I was there for 5 years, over 5 years, in fact. And then I've had the experience of actually owning a football club for a team in the 2nd division in Spain, which almost always we were able to stay in the 2nd division. We weren't relegated to the 3rd division, but in the last few match days. So I know football from the very low ranks. I suffer a lot from football. I have suffered so much being a president, being an owner. And now I'm the president of La Liga, one of the most important leagues in the world. And I'd just like to make a comment related to what Catherine said. When they talk about the 5 big leagues, Catherine, we still talk in the past. There is one big league at an economical level, which is the Premier League. No one can doubt that whatsoever. Then after that, we have other leagues like the Bundesliga and La Liga. And then after that, we have the French League and the Series A in Italy. But you know, the big leagues, it's not necessarily due to the revenue, but it's also related to the financial sustainability, because there are other leagues that aren't as big, medium-sized leagues, which are as big as the the big 5 leagues because they are financially sustainable. So financial sustainability, La Liga and the Bundesliga are the 2 most financially sustainable leagues, because the Serie A, the French league, and the Premier, they are not financially sustainable. They are financed just to cover the losses. Their money is injected by the owners. And what does this mean? It means that European football, especially professional football, is sometimes unbalanced. And you get inflationary effects, which are very, very important when we're talking about the salaries. When I talk about the Super League, I don't know if anybody knows anything about the Super League, what they want to get out of the Super League, at least in Spain. The 3 teams left, 2 are Spanish teams, and the true intellectual person behind it is the president of Real Madrid, Mr. Florentino Perez. So I have had, for the last 2 years, I haven't actually spoken to him, obviously, but we have lots of debates on this issue. So we live the Super League more intensely in Spain, maybe here in Sweden. And people said, but why the fans? Could they make the mistake I had this afternoon? Because in Spain, the concept of the fans in Madrid, or the Real Madrid fans, really like Florentino Perez. And so as far as that's concerned, they still continued like him. So, because some of the media in Spain follow this up. And as I say, this isn't the actual object of my presentation this afternoon, but I just wanted to bring it up. But also, I would like to make a reference to what Lars Christer said. There's always a crisis. In football, there's always a crisis. It's true, but the crises are always different. And the crisis that we have today in football is very different to the crisis that took place in 15 or 20 years ago. The financial importance of football today isn't incompatible with sport, but we just know how we can fit it all in. But it's as important as the biggest crisis that we could possibly be experiencing at the moment. There was a crisis in 2021, April. If the president of the UEFA, Alexander Seferin, hadn't made a decision, and I've always had lots of differences with him, and I spoke to him a lot that famous weekend, but maybe we would be talking about different things related to European football, because he designed a strategy to try and ensure that the Super League wasn't successful. The fans, especially the British fans, who we're very grateful to, by the way, they led the project, but it was also led from sports institutions, because there was a lot of different situations that had to be fit in that weekend, and that's what Mr. Seferin did. But the challenges we have in professional football, well, there's lots of major challenges, but I'm going to talk about 2. One is the Super League, and the other one is the financial sustainability of European football. And these challenges can't be analyzed now like they were 15 or 20 years ago. The football industry today generates 30 times more money it does today than it did then. The audiovisual rights then in Europe were worth $1 billion or $2 billion amongst everyone. But at the moment, we're over 20,000 million. So we should be aware that the situation today is very different. And if we're not aware of the fact that it's different, then we'll never be able to solve this crisis. I would like to remind you of a fact that I tend to talk about when we're in Europe. There's over 1,554 clubs, professional clubs in Europe. We have big clubs, we have medium-sized ones, and small ones, but they're all professional football clubs. And these professional clubs give work to 53,715 families, players who obviously support their families. And there are players that earn 1,500 euros a month and others that earn 3 million euros a month, but they're all professional footballers. And our obligation is to defend and maintain this industry and this sport. In Europe, there are over 75,140 non-sporting staff who work for the clubs. And I said they're not players and they're not referees. They're just non-sporting staff. So it's 75,000 families who live off this sport. 75,000 families that we have to protect. And I said there are non-sporting staff in the small teams and in the big teams. And we have to protect all of them. And sometimes decisions are made at institutions that do not protect them all. So this is why the Super League, in a very clear way, is endangering maintaining this business in Europe. And so this is why we have to be very clear, very harsh when we talk about this. It's just enough sending out a press release or a declaration. No, you have to be constantly talking about it, which is what we do in Spain. You know, from La Liga, and the majority of the clubs talk out against it because we are supporting the current model. Because the Super League that was presented in April 2021, which was failed, was the presentation at that time of a format of competition. The Superliga is much more than a competition format. The Superliga is a concept that we saw at the very beginning that started, I think, around the year 2000. And it's the concept that the richest clubs, the ones with the most assets, you know, they're the ones who want to actually decide what has to be done in professional football. They were very clear about that. You know, the G8, the G14, you know, they've been growing, but they always had the same objective, that the big clubs, the one with the most assets, should dominate European football. And that risk continues to exist. Why? Because the big clubs, gradually, they have been gaining ground, you know, to the different institutions. And they've been achieving their objectives gradually to a certain level that in the year 2019, there was a project between the ECA and the UEFA, which was a new, well, the Super League. And they said, well, there's the model that they're talking about, and they wanted to change. But since 2021, it was a format that was closed. Now they say it's open, but it's the 2019 model, which is closed. And I'll explain now. But anyway, gradually they've been gaining ground. They have, as I say, been talking about distributing the money. And that is very damaging. Because when you talk about, you know, distributing the broadcasting rights to the clubs who generate the rights, that's not well thought out at all. Because at the end of the day, and as a president of the Spanish League, I think this is also something that's not even ethical. Because at the end of the day, everything that is distributed by the big clubs, 70% or 80% goes to the players. So it goes to 300 or 400 players all over the world, very important players. And to the other 50,000 players, what happens? And so we forget about them. And what about the families or these non-sporting stuff? We forget about them. And sometimes I think it's a question of ethics, because I think that when we're trying to, you know, increase the value of our broadcasting rights, or when the clubs who play in the Champions League get more money, I think we're working for Ferrari or for Porsche. Because instead of having 5 Porsches, they're going to have 7, these players. Or instead of having one yacht, they're going to have 2 yachts. And instead of working, so you know, it's not working for football in itself and the sport and the clubs, because everything has a limit. And I think that this is a problem of ethics, which is part of the current football crisis. So therefore, I think the Super League is a concept. We should never forget that. It's a concept supported by the richest club and those with mass assets. And they, whatever happens, you know, well, whatever happens in the European Court of Justice, there will still be something that is continued. They talk about the sports model for European football. You know, it's a pyramid model, but I'm going to refer to what the model for European football has been for the last 30 years. And it's been a very successful model. Obviously, it's got a few defects that need to be corrected. Somebody talked about solidarity. I'm talking about governance. Obviously, things have to be improved and corrected. I'm never in agreement with the UEFA and the FIFA all the time. I've been a real rebel in my life. But let's defend what works. And this has been a very successful model. As far as sports is concerned, the European football model has already been based on national competitions which are vertical. So it's a vertical national competition. And we have the first division, then you have a second division, then you can even have a third division. and that is when you get promotion and relegation. And that is complemented with a European model, which is horizontal. So that then feeds into the European competitions, the Europa League, the Conference League, and the Champions League, where the access to these European competitions could only take place through your performance in your domestic leagues. So it didn't matter whichever country you came from, your vertical competition fed into the European competition. And so the sports performance, didn't only allowed you to go into the European competition for this season, but not for the next one. So this vertical model in the domestic leagues and horizontal one in Europe, where the majority of leagues have the opportunity to have access. And as you had to classify for this season, but not next one. And this will continue to make the domestic leagues interesting or emotional. And so this is really being questioned if the Super League comes off. They no longer talk about a closed shop league. They're talking about merit-based, because in the 2019, the model was rejected by most European clubs. And it was a model that was presented in the time by the UEFA and the ECA. But the UEFA listened to the leagues and listened to the majority of clubs and said, no, this project can't come off, because this project will have 2 divisions in Europe, but it won't any longer be a horizontal model. It will be a vertical model. We'll have a first division and a second division with promotion and relegation. But when they introduced this model in Europe, the top division will always be full of the 15 clubs that are always there, and you didn't have access from the domestic leagues to the first division. And so that destroys the current model. And it destroys it to such an extent that on a financial level or an economic level, in the Spanish league, we have a report by KPMG and FTI, which used to be called Delta Partners, which only the Spanish league, because this model, this means that the revenue in the domestic market, when we're talking about season tickets, television, and ticketing, which will go down by 50%. So just apply that to all the others. And then in addition to that, we didn't just get a fall of 50% in the domestic leagues, but also those who'll be playing in that competition, Barcelona, Real Madrid, would then go to your domestic league with hundreds of million more euros than all the others. The others will have 50% less, and those big clubs will have a lot more. And so the league... So this competition will destroy and destructure the league system. So we shouldn't believe what they say from the Super League. They said, no, we're going to do, merit-based. No, they're going to the system of the 2 divisions. So we have to be very wary of what we hear, because lots of intoxication. There's going to be a lot of criticism related to this, saying that now they do have some sort of opened competition, but that's not true. So it's going to destructure European football. We're suffering this now because we have a problem with all these teams that are playing in the European competitions, especially the champions. So when they go back to the domestic competitions, they are playing because obviously the Champions League grows and the revenues grow for the clubs. So what they're distributing for solidarity isn't sufficient to compensate what they earn in Europe, which means that there's going to be big differences in the domestic leagues between the big clubs and the rest. So these are challenges that need to be faced and solved. But the only institution in Europe that can solve these issues is the UEFA. So this is why I am supporting the UEFA to face this challenge. Why? Because it's the only institution where all the European countries are, and it's the only institution that has the knowledge, and it is integrated in all the European institutions, and where we have, and they listen to the leagues. And I think that sometimes there are things that I don't like and I don't agree with, but with this particular challenge, which is one of the most serious challenges that European football has seen over the last 30 years, the only institution that can solve it is the UEFA. And we shouldn't worry about hearing the words like monopoly. People seem to be really wary of the word monopoly. But there are monopolies in the European Union and in Spain, La Liga. We're a monopoly. but in Italy, in the UK, because in Spain there is a law from the Spanish government that says that there can only be one federation and there can only be one professional football league. And the European Union has never, said anything about that, nor in Italy, just because we have that law. So therefore, in Europe, why can't there be an institution like the UEFA that has the sort of nature of being a monopoly? Because is it necessary in European football? As I said the other day in Strasbourg when I was in the European Parliament talking to the MEPs for sport, and we said, if the rules of the UEFA, it seems that they're against competition law, well, let's have a directive from the European Union that regulates the situation and gives UEFA the same sort of situation like we have in Spain with our league, if it's a correct, good regulator, so that football in Europe is balanced and it is financially sustainable and it balances the different competitions. And this happens in Spain, this happens in lots of other countries, but it also has to be monitored by the corresponding organs, bodies, and courts. And it's the only place where it can happen. But what they won't be able to do is to get 20 or 15 clubs in one Super League in one competition. They can't do it. As the president of Real Madrid said, we'll organize it and we'll give you some money for solidarity, but we don't want that system. And it's true that there are issues that the UEFA, in my opinion, has to correct related to governance. But also I have to say, it's my 10th anniversary as a president of La Liga, but as I've said, I've been in football for many years now. But I also have to say that UEFA has made big steps in the right direction over the last few years. In my opinion, they're not enough. And they're not going as fast as I would like to see. I would like them to go faster and bigger steps. But at the moment, the challenge that we have is very important, and it needs to be left very clear that the UEFA is the only body in Europe that can put a solution for European football. So we don't destroy what we've talked about early of these 75,000 jobs, 1,554 clubs. And so the concept of the Super League and the big clubs, who are the ones that want to dominate Europe, and they can't grow any more than they are. And I'm not actually as worried. Well, I'm worried about the Super League and also about the ECA, but also my friend Nasser Al-Khelafi will be listening about this, I'm sure. And sometimes I am under the feeling that it's like the Super League, but it's going slower. And that worries me. So I hope to get rid of this feeling, but the feeling's still there within me, and that worries me. So the UEFA is the only place where there can be a solution, and I'm sure about that. Another important challenge that we have is when we talk about the financial sustainability of European football. And that goes back to what I said at the beginning. There needs to be someone, as we say that we have these global European competitions, so someone has to regulate these competitions, but it can only be one regulator. We have our financial control in Spain. The Premier League have one, but they don't apply it. We've seen that with Manchester City. In France, it doesn't exist. Or they have one that exists, but they don't apply it to PSG, so it's as if it didn't exist. In Italy, they don't have one. So the UEFA is the only institution that can do it. They need to make everything almost as similar as possible. Indirectly, they do, because all the clubs that play in the European competitions, they have to have a license. But so I say it's the only institution that can do it. The UEFA has to continue to exist, and this is why the UEFA, in my opinion, needs to change things related to governance as well as other things. But it is the place where all this should be done. And we have to support UEFA. And that's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to offer these few thoughts. And as I say, I don't think that you see so much about this in Sweden, but this is a very important challenge that we're facing. We're talking about the European Super League, as we say, the power of these big clubs, the wealthiest clubs in Europe. Financial sustainability also affects the leagues, which are small and medium-sized, because these are communicating vessels. If there's a Super League, then the revenue will go to the Super League, and this will then be lost by the domestic leagues. And when I talk of league, we say this is the time to change lots of issues related to football with regards to solidarity. Solidarity isn't just a percentage that can be applied. Solidarity is also to see the competition formats. Are they correct? Are they not correct? And I can remember when the UEFA came to Spain and went to other countries, and they said, you know, instead of 3 teams going to Champions, they said 4. And I said to Marchetti, no, you can have one back. I don't want 4 Spanish teams playing in the Champions. I prefer to have 1 less, because that will cause more differences, a bigger gap between those clubs and the other clubs. And we need to think about that. Also, we have to think about the fact that we're experiencing an era where they just keep creating a competition. So we've got a problem. Let's create a Club World Cup. We've got another problem. Like the FIFA is just, I don't know, there's a new tournament that they've just devised in their latest meeting. So what with tournaments? What happens? You know, with the Club World Cups, I'm not talking about the national teams. The same clubs go. 85% of the revenue are distributed to the big clubs. 70% go to the players, more Ferraris, more yachts, etc. And only 15% is distributed to the others as solidarity. So isn't it better for all the leagues to sit down with institutions? We all sit around a table and say, right, let's put a stop to this. Let's have no more competitions, no more tournaments. Let's defend what's always worked. And let's see what we've got to do. And as a league, you know, I'm the first one that's interested in this, so that there is a better competitive balance and that there is more solidarity or a better distribution of salary. So that's all I wanted to say, and thank you very much.
President Tebas, thank you very much. Now, when it's time to round off, before I make my closing remarks, I would like all the panelists actually to come up on stage. So please, let's give them an applause. Thank you very much. I started 2.5 hours ago with this idea of being unfaithful. Maybe it's time to close by saying we need to be faithful. We need to be faithful to the systems that we've actually built. I think from my perspective, one of the key conclusions from today is really about something that we value so much, that we don't think of as a product, but rather as a religion, is not built overnight. And that means, on the one hand, when something is seen as you can actually be unfaithful, maybe you also need to keep faith. And I think that's one of the major things that I'm taking with me. Another thing which I think is also very important is this idea of dialogue. So in academia, we actually love when people don't agree. And on that sense, I think the panel did many things well, but maybe me as a moderator should have created a little bit more friction. Hopefully it will come out here. But I think the way to be faithful is actually to keep the dialogue open. And I remember when we started planning this event, that we really talked about, this is the starting point. This is not the ending of an event. This is the starting point of something bigger. And I think that we need to keep that going. Final things, I have 2 very concrete things. If you would like to meet, if you're media, with Mr. Tebas or someone else, Mr. Tebas will be seen in the opposite room over there. For all of you that are going out to the mingle, I just want to thank our fantastic students that will play music. We call them the double talents. I should say I'm not one of those double talents, but we have students that are really good in business, but also in music and in sports. Finally, here, if we take the analogy of a football club, we have the team. I think they have done really well, but I should say, Mr. Tebas, I think you made a great point of acknowledging all those who are not seen on stage. So in order to make this event happen, we have had a lot of people in the background, including all the technicians that have made this possible. So I actually want to thank them. So I think we should give them the final applause. Thank you very much. Because as we said, you know, if we want to stay faithful, celebrating football for all is once in a while really giving those who do not play on stage one of the big applause. With that, the panel will stay here for a few minutes. All the guests, please go out, mingle, have a little bit of friction. And I should say, for all of you that are still online, thank you so much. We hope that you engage with us or with someone else. With that, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you. Thank you.